I've been reading Webtoon for close to a decade, and I'm starting to have a giant problem with it. I've discovered some outright amazing works of art and had the opportunity to meet their even more wonderful creators. I've read Webtoons through the best and worst parts of my life, been able to make a career off of talking about my opinions on Webtoons, and met so many incredible people through doing this. Webtoon, whether I like it or not, is an incredibly huge part of my life. But recently, I've found myself feeling an odd sense of dread every time I start up reading a comic on Webtoon. No matter what comic I pick out, I can't help but feel the foreboding feeling that it's all going to go wrong in one very specific and terrible way. I feel as if I picked up a loaded gun and started playing Russian roulette, but instead of a bullet having been left in the chamber, it's... Webtoon launched its English-speaking platform in 2014 and quickly rose from the most popular comic distributor in South Korea to the leading online publishing platform for the entire world, with no signs of slowing down in popularity anytime soon. I came across Webtoon when I was in high school over 8 years ago, the prime age to get into webcomics, so I've been around to see their rise in popularity nearly from the start. You could call me an expert. Or a loser. I really enjoy the platform. Webtoon has a massive catalog of original and independent comics that I can read for free whenever and wherever my heart desires. But as time has gone on, I couldn't help but notice a widespread trend across a bunch of Webtoons I had been reading. Repeatedly, I'd see stories divert their two love interests away from the larger story into a side plot in order to bring the two together due to bonds formed in a trying time. This doesn't sound too bad. Hard times tend to bring out the best in people. What could possibly be so terrible that it warrants an entire discussion about it? Well... I'm not necessarily upset that rape and sexual assault exists as a plot point in comics and webtoons, but I will say I'm growing upset at how it's portrayed to its audience. Recently, I was reading a comic called My Child Will Have a Different Father, where we follow our protagonist Hanael, who gets kidnapped by her ex-situationship, Lord Cheater. We sit uncomfortably for chapter after chapter while Cheater tells us exactly what he's going to do to Hanael, while Hanael runs away trying not to be violated. Things look pretty dire until the love interest, Prince Lutz, comes to Hanael's rescue, and they run away happily without having a further thought about the ordeal Hanael had just experienced. While that entire series of scenes is messed up, what I didn't realize at the time was that it broke me. Mentally, I had been worn down so much to the point where I couldn't take reading another scene like that and had just subconsciously started to avoid anything that was similar to the nature of My Child Will Have a Different Father, because it left me feeling so incredibly gross and honestly hurt as a reader. Many readers, as well as I have had some experience with rape or assault, so to have a comic like My Child Will Have a Different Father shove our faces in it, begging us to empathize with the main character and then forget about it 2 chapters later, I can't help but be a little bit angry. In fact, I'm a bit angry. And if it was just one shitty comic, that would be one thing. But if you've read any Webtoon original romance comic in the last couple of years, you know it isn't. This same type of scene where the heroine is about to get pounced on by a maniacal rapist only to be saved at the last minute by their muscly boyfriend, which is immediately forgotten about outside of bringing the love interest closer together, is not unique to My Child Will Have a Different Father. It's not the first, and certainly doesn't seem to be the last comic to have this seemingly obligatory assault scene shoehorned in, which is incredibly upsetting to me. Webtoon authors will use rape or assault and forget about it as if it were nothing, and because the story treats the subject matter as if it were nothing, that makes me feel as if my experience is nothing, which doesn't make me want to keep coming back to read in the long run. These random side tangents of rape and assault in Webtoon does nothing but alienate an audience and severely damage a story. So that begs the question, what can be done about Webtoon choosing to promote such stories? Picture this. You are sitting down to read the newest Webtoon when the Archduke's daughter strikes back. Himalaya is a quirky girl with adorable personality traits, such as eating food and talking to her poor servants. Himalaya is then forced to marry an ugly fat person who's closing in on her, licking his lips and telling her he's going to do horrible things to her. What is she going to do? Don't worry, you don't have to think about it too hard. Within these stories, these scenes are only used to show us one of two things. One, the male lead is better than a rapist, which, good job, buddy. That's literally not even the bare minimum. Or two, the male lead will always come to the rescue and together the pair can trauma bond over the situation and forget about it afterwards. I'm sure Cole, Duke of the North-South border, will rock up and sweep our dear Himalaya away without a second thought being given to serve fat and ugly. So how did you two meet?
Oh, well, it's actually a funny story. I was walking home and some guy pulled me into an alley and told me he's going to and then my Prince Charming came to my rescue and swept me away.
Are you okay? Did you call the police?
Police? No, we just went home and oh my gosh, how romantic!
Comics will then proceed to never talk about the incident ever again, never exploring how the assaultee and rescuer could have built their relationship on a weird foundation. The assault is just used as a way to grow a relationship because heaven forbid the author use their brain to have their female character make a connection with someone without getting brutally traumatized. This type of story sucks. Not only does it make characters seem like flat pieces of paper with a short list of personality traits stapled to them, but if the story doesn't take this type of thing seriously, why should we as an audience take anything else in the story seriously? If there are going to be no long-lasting issues or traumas that come from an event like rape or assault, why was it introduced to the story in the first place? I, the reader, have just been witness to one of the worst actions a person can commit on another human being, and I am being told that the author ultimately doesn't think it's that big of a deal. Sexual assault is an incredibly serious topic, and when you treat it like this, just plopping it into a story and moving on, it trivializes it in a way that I think is incredibly shitty. It turns watching something that will forever change the protagonist's life, their character, their relationships, how they act from this point on in the story into nothing. It's just a macabre episode of Tom and Jerry. Oh boy, I hope Himalaya gets away from Baron Von Nasty. Oh good, the Grand Duke hit him over the head with the frying pan. And our heroes can skip off into the sunset forever unaffected by their experiences. I've spoken about certain traumatizing events in my life before, and if you want to hear about it in more detail, you can watch My Child Will Have a Different Father video. But essentially, the experience broke and forever changed me. I was at the absolute worst points of my life because of it. And relationships with some people grew and blossomed, and relationships with others fell apart and have never been the same. I was angry, I was sad, I was scared. Angry because I let something I didn't want to happen to me happen. Sad because the people that were supposed to love me and help me ignored me and made me feel like I was the crazy one. And scared because what if something like that happened again? Scared because I didn't know if I could trust others the way I had before. Was all the stuff I heard growing up about how men only want one thing true? Was I really supposed to feel like a scared animal around half of the human population for the rest of my life? Ultimately, as sucky and awful as the experience was for me, I grew and learned from the past. past. A big part of who I am today wouldn't have happened without those experiences. Part of how I entered into platonic and romantic relationships is forever altered to help prevent incidents like that from ever happening again. I am who I am because of it. It's not just something that happens for people to find their romantic partners. It's a life event you have to work on each and every day to help heal. I would be completely different had someone else come along to fix my issues. The author has absolutely no imagination as to how to bring their characters together, so rather than using their brain, they just slap assault into their comic and hope for the best. But all that does is show the audience that the author didn't put any thought into their own story. It also shows us that the characters within the story don't care about the assault either. They will walk away unscathed and never think about the incident ever again. While this is a side plot in the story as a whole, it ultimately goes to show us that nothing matters within the story. Because if the characters don't take the incident seriously, why should you continue to take any of the rest of the story seriously? Not to sound like my almond mom, but the rape in these comics is just empty calories. One of the first examples that comes to mind is the comic I'm the Queen in This Life, where our female lead Ariadne is engaged to a horrible guy named Caesar she helped overthrow the kingdom with. Once they had successfully killed the king and Caesar had taken the crown, cracks began to show. He demeans Ariadne in front of others, he neglects her, and he plans her brutal murder behind her back with the help of her stepsister, all the while using her as a toy. We then see Ariadne getting assaulted by Caesar. We watch as she winces uncomfortably at the screen and tells us how she just needs to bear it. This scene was written to show us how terrible Caesar is, but here's the thing. There are a million other ways to show us how terrible and womanizing Caesar is without adding rape into the mix. The author has just shown us how he treats and demeans women. I got it, okay? I get the point Caesar is a bad guy, but this point isn't used to tell us anything more than, I don't know, he's a really bad dude. The comic Teach Me How to Desire quite literally starts out with the man brutally trying to rape the female lead. We're told that there is a war between men and demons, and only the Holy Lady Beryl can stop it. She has to choose who the demonic soul is, and when she chooses wrong the first time, she is sent to live with Lord Rapey. He orders the servants to hold her down while he tells us how much of a rapist he is, and the whole series of scenes is quite uncomfortable and hard to watch. This is supposed to show us, the reader, that the men of this lead's world were demons who wore masks, and that's why she chose to live with a demon in her third life, to show us that, guys, the demon isn't that bad. He's probably not going to rape or kill her like the other guys did. I just think that that point could have been made without the rape. I don't know. Don't worry though, even when the genders are swapped, the same rules do still apply. In The Princess's Jewels, Ariana is a princess who wants to date multiple guys. So Ariana embarks on a journey to collect men like Pokemon, calling them her jewels. Jade, one of the jewels that Ariana owns, is stalked by a girl who wants to date and own him. She's totally different from the main character Ariana, who wants to date and own Jade though. So she kidnaps Jade in order to force herself onto him, and things are looking rough when Ariana appears to rescue him, and together they trauma bond over the entire incident. The scene is only used to show us, the reader, that Ariana isn't worse than a kidnapping rapist, but rather than writing Ariana to not be a slave-owning asshole who just wants sex, the author just wrote a heightened version of Ariana's character and hoped no one would notice enough to care. You might be wondering, what's the difference between something like this and dark romance? Well, dark romance is marketed as such, and therefore doesn't hide behind the glittery framing of regular romance. Because it presents itself as such, it's pretty easy to spot a dark romance that does touch on the same topics without trying to mask itself behind an allegedly romantic cutesy facade. And since it's easier to spot, I don't touch it with a 10-foot pole, because I know I will hate it. But this sort of thing isn't labeled as dark romance. In fact, most, if not all of the examples I have given to you are labeled as young adult or younger. And you might say to me, Maddie, Webtoon is actually really good about this. Look at these incredibly vague content warnings. And to that I say, First off, I kind of feel like these come too little too late. If I've read like 10 chapters of a comic and then chapter 11 starts off with, this chapter is a rape chapter, I kind of just wish you told me that from the start. Like, honestly, I don't like it. And on top of that, they're so vague that when they do put them on, I barely even know what to expect. So many webtoons start with a child abuse warning, but what that means in practice can be anything from a child gets hit once on the face and cries but is immediately saved and protected, to the child protagonist of this comic spends the first 20 or so chapters getting mercilessly abused really graphically. Like, I saw a trigger warning for animal abuse in the comic The Flower That Swallowed the Beast, and the animal abuse in question was a wolf man who had been beaten up. How is a reader supposed to gauge what they can and can't handle when there are so many mixed signals? And I want to be clear, this is not me asking for a dark romance genre on Webtoon. I think ethically speaking, this would be a huge mistake, as according to most sources, around 70% of the users in North America are aged 24 or younger, with a female audience of 58 to 64%, which is only expected to grow. This number is going to grow by around 16 to 30% by the year 2033 because of the rising influence of smartphones and accessibility that each age has access to. It's your duty as the leading name for webcomics to not expose a young and potentially underage audience to stories such as these that only end up desensitizing people to the very real horrors of the world. Now, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't overreacting, and to make sure that this is actually a trend across Webtoon. So I had Micah, my editor, sit down and read the 50 newest Webtoons being promoted by Webtoon to see what the facts were. Micah, take it away! Micah? Micah!
Okay, so hi, I'm Micah. To stop myself from going fully insane, I decided to keep the amount I read of each webtoon relatively brief. So I stuck to the first 3 chapters of the last 50 webtoon originals and compiled them into a "do they get horrifically assaulted" spreadsheet. I'm counting any scene where a character is in immediate danger and then is rescued. For example, in Not the First Time, our protagonist, Young In, is grabbed by this rapist guy, but is rescued right in the nick of time by our sexy, buff, dark-haired dude lead. Well, at the end of the day, Young In is fine. I think this is still well within the bounds of the type of scene Maddie is talking about. That said, defining what does and doesn't count got somewhat complicated, because you have stuff like regression of the Yong clan heir, where our protagonist is like overtaken with the spirit of a pervy old man, and he has to jump into cold water to stop himself from doing something he'd regret.
Don't we all?
Or level 999 goblin, where our hero accidentally sticks the titular level 999 goblin on this woman, and well, it's, I guess, played comedically and is a series of misunderstandings, and nothing actually bad comes of it. The comic just sits on panel after panel of this, which, while not explicitly a rape scene, is certainly as fucking uncomfortable as one. So here's how it breaks down. Of the last 50 comics, 6 have scenes containing characters committing or attempting to commit sexual assault, with 7 comics in the complicated or close call zone. So that leaves us with the result of 1.4 out of 10 comics having a sexual assault scene, and if we're including the complicated and close call examples, a 2.6 out of 10 chance. Now, while that's not a crazy ratio, it kinda is a crazy ratio, because you gotta remember, we're just talking about the first 3 chapters here. I'd bet good money that several of the non-offenders on this list will go on in their further chapters to have long, uncomfortable sexual assault scenes, as something like My Child Will Have a Different Father gets there around chapter 12. Unfortunately, there's basically nothing you can do to get me to read more of level 999 Goblin, so I can only tell you what happens in the first 3, which is still quite a bit. back to Maddie.
Ultimately, the events of stories like these have made me want to completely avoid the romance, fantasy, and drama section of Webtoon as a whole. I don't want to constantly be bombarded with trivialized rape after trivialized assault. Call me crazy. I don't want to do it. There's so much. Why is there so much? So if random rape and assault in Webtoons does nothing but hurt a story and alienate an audience, why does it exist within storytelling on Webtoon in the first place? When did this become an issue? Personally, I think it all started with Lore Olympus. In my opinion, I feel like fewer stories across the platform were using rape or assault as a big ticket story beat to get an audience to connect with a character. But you know what the difference between a story like Lore Olympus and My Child Will Have a Different Father is? Lore Olympus actually spends time on it. There are ramifications for Persephone if someone were to find out her secret. The only reason Persephone is living away from home is because of the virgin scholarship she's been given. So if she tells people she's not a virgin, there is a series of dominoes that will fall because of it. But keeping this secret in ultimately eats away at Persephone. While Lore Olympus certainly has its problems, the sexual assault is not just tacked on. It's an integral part of the plot and is treated with the severity and level of respect the topic deserves. I remember going through my first experience with the sexual harassment and reading Lore Olympus at the same time. I had never felt so seen in my life in that moment. There was someone who understood what I was going through. I was not alone in my struggles, and unfortunately there were a lot of others who felt the same way, leading Webtoon to learn a weird lesson from the whole thing. Instead of seeing and understanding that people liked that aspect of Lore Olympus for getting to walk alongside Persephone during the struggle, getting to feel seen and no longer alone, Webtoon instead just thought we liked comics with rape in it. Imagine you sit down to read the newest chapter of When the Archduke's Daughter Strikes Back. Himalaya and her lover, Duke Big and Sexy, are on a cute and romantic date. They go to a festival their town is having, and just as the fireworks are about to go off, a dragon hits the first tower. Holy crap, this is intense. Himalaya and Duke Big and Sexy watch in horror as the tower bursts into flames. Was it an accident? No, because the second dragon flies into the second tower. Himalaya is in danger. The debris from the towers is about to fall on her. What will happen? Duke Big and Sexy blocks the fiery rubble from hitting her, and she finally realizes her true feelings for him. Together, they go home and finally consummate their marriage. Will we ever hear about the fantasy version of 9/11 ever again? Absolutely not. Will there be any type of mental damage that occurred from the incident? Unlikely. Now, imagine you're weirded out by that random traumatic scene, so you drop that comic and immediately move on to something else. The characters are walking around, living their lives, then suddenly, fantasy 9/11! Again! You move on, but actually no, at least half of the comics have dragons flying into towers. It sounds comical and very disrespectful to the subject matter. I shouldn't be desensitized to something so horrific and tragic, but here we are, baby! We started getting comic after comic with some aspect of assault in it, but the comics didn't hit the same way Lore Olympus did. Why? These comics failed at this because they never actually took the time to properly explain the ramifications actions like assault has on a person. The sensitive matter cuts deep and has a long and arduous healing process that affects not only you and your mental health, but those around you. But time and time again, I am hit with random assault after random assault that ultimately leads nowhere in a story and does little more than desensitize me to the serious subject matter at hand, and I'm tired. I'm so tired of reading a new comic just for it to pull out the same old, horribly handled scenes in them because it hurts. It reopens my old wounds for nothing. The rape and assault of these leads is just used for shock factor and to get us to instantly empathize with the victim. And when all is said and all is done, the victims don't care. So why should we? It's like getting a giant fuck you from the very story that was desperate from your attention in the first place. Here's the thing. I have read multiple stories where assault is a big theme and issue within that story, and loved and related to those plot lines. The difference is that the presentation and time the author spends on the serious subject matter. A novel that helped me immensely deal with my experience was Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. Speak is the story about a freshman girl, Melanie, who goes through a deeply traumatic assault. We follow her as she withdraws and becomes isolated, unable to speak to anyone. The novel deals with trauma, depression, and the journey one takes in finding their voice after enduring a deeply traumatic experience. I related immensely to Melanie, even if our circumstances and experiences were different, and I recommend the book to anyone who might need it. From a writing and drawing perspective, there are also so many different ways of showing characters bonding together through hard times, or even having one character rescue the other. Aside from, just making your characters want more than sex with a female lead, they could also have goals in life and common interests that bring the pair closer together. I'm not mad that the authors chose to use assault in their stories. I'm mad at the disrespect the subject matter has been treated with. I, as a reader, have become so numb to the near comical applications of rape in webtoons that I can't help but be bothered by that. If you did want a scene where your characters trauma bonded, I can suggest a comic My In-Laws Are Obsessed With Me. Here, our main lead Parashati is nearly killed by her scorned ex-boyfriend, and her love interest Therdeo comes to her rescue. But instead of having them immediately go home to bang and forget about the situation, they go home and sit on it. We have panel after panel of uncomfortable silence as Parashati specifically lets the events of the day sink in. Meanwhile, her love interest Therdeo sits by her side and says nothing. There is usually such a focus on what characters should say that we often forget just how powerful silence can be for a story as well. We feel Parashati's fear and sadness that someone she once loved could do this to her. We see Therdeo's uncertainty in the moment regarding what he should do. That hard part of the story, while being a kind of tangent, helps Parashati to harden her beliefs that her past life was in fact real. It does trauma bond the pair, but it's not the only reason they can later get along. It's just as emotionally engaging and heartbreaking without adding rape into things. Now, I know what you're thinking. The obvious solution to this problem is to just get off of Webtoon. But I have a confession. I like Webtoons. Reading about the magical exposition fairy that poops on a guard so Lucina can go to a party. Reading about a guy who wears a giant panda head to meet his son for the first time. It's hilarious. And ultimately, I don't think the solution is to just stop. And honestly, even if I wanted to, I'm not sure I could. There are not a lot of other comic options out there. I truly believe that the option to the problem shouldn't just be to stop reading Webtoon. Webtoon is the leading comic posting site in the world. Leaving doesn't guarantee you won't find terrible stories elsewhere, but it does guarantee Webtoon won't do anything about the problem. Imagine Webtoon as a giant library, one of the biggest in the world, with a private bridge that leads directly to your front door. You walk in, gaze at its massive halls, marvel at the sheer volume of human creation that's housed there. There's so much that you can barely think of where to start, so you walk to the new/recommended table that the librarians have set up. How would you feel if amongst the 10 to 15 books laid out there, 5 just had the worst, most graphic depictions of depraved assault you could imagine that barely affect the plot in any way? Oh, and don't worry, half the books are labeled young adult. I'd become a little bit, if not extremely, wary of the library. It's not fun to feel like I'm playing Russian roulette with my media choices. I would probably ask for some type of reform from the public library staff to more carefully consider what they're promoting. We, as the readers, the viewers, the audience, have the option to voice our opinions and concerns to the proper people. While, yes, theoretically I can just stop using the public library, where else can I go? I guess there's a Barnes & Noble down the street, but I don't have have $10 to $20 to shell out every time I want to read something. There's a used bookstore I can go to, but I can only read the first 3 chapters of a comic before I also have to pay. Maybe there's a free library somewhere in your neighborhood where you might be able to find some things for free, but you still have to sift through the garbage on your own to find the gems. The library with its bridge built directly to you is only going to stick around and expand for years to come. If the library is the best option and the library has the funds to expand, then why not voice our concerns? As a reader, I can voice my opinion on the matter and hope that others hear my thoughts and voice their own. As a creator, I don't have to choose the easy way out when I'm telling my stories. I can use my brain and write meaningful connections between my characters that aren't just a fast grab for empathy. I can spend time creating meaningful art and stories that are just as heart-wrenching and pack a punch without being sensationalized. I can support the stories that don't just use rape as a side tangent. I can instead choose something better. While Webtoon does have a giant problem, one which ultimately alienates its audience in the long run and ruins the stories on the site, it still has the potential to be something great. There are hundreds of thousands of passionate creators on the site that are excited for a chance to share a story they love with an audience. There are wonderful people I have met who truly put their heart and soul into their creations. Without these passionate artists and storytellers, Webtoon wouldn't have a leg to stand on. Rather than supporting the schlock, support the true artists on the site. Support the stories that treat its subject matter seriously. Webtoon has the time, money, and resources to promote the gems that are on its site, and I think it's only fair that they do so. Thank you so much to my patrons, Izama, Roses and Water, Lady Alpossum, Nowhere to Xander, Icy, TJ, Menti Williams, Char Char, Lygon, Meep Cubed, Aleheart, Bean Dork, Anna the Giant, Abby Gale, Selena BB, Claudia E. Gomez, Blue Vamp Countess, Pink Naya, Mies Coles Punk, Squidius, Kathleen O'Neill, Nevius Fox, Punchy McPuncherson, Stacy Child, Jocelyn Hertel, Steel Angel, Dominus Bader, Fizzy Dizzy Studios, Jumping Spooter, Matt Nicky, Zany Gemini, Natalie Deer, Mags, and Mashiru. If you would also like to join my Patreon to have your name read aloud at the end of these videos and get early access to my main videos as well as my second channel's videos, you can join my Patreon for only $2 a month. And if you don't want to do that, I also made some super cool merch. There's dogs on it, and I'm actually currently wearing mine right now as I speak and edit this, so if you want to match, that's pretty cool too. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Bye bye!